It's nice to see such a good turnout despite it being an afternoon. So it's my pleasure to welcome you all to this conversation with Ms. Wanuri Kahiu, the recipient of Spirit of Cinema Award this year. Congratulations, Wanuri. So we'll chat for a good 30 to 40 minutes and then I'll open the floor for questions, or if you really have a question that you must ask, you can just raise your hands. So I'll start with a brief introduction. So Wanuri is a filmmaker from Nairobi, Kenya. She's one of the most prominent voices emerging from the contemporary African cinema at the moment. Some of you must have already watched her film Rafiki, her most globally acclaimed film. It's a beautiful queer love story between two young women. If you haven't, please watch it. It's playing at this festival along with the two other films. Pomsy, it's a science fiction short film, and From a Whisper, it's a debut feature film. So we'll open with a question on Afro bubblegum. It's a concept that Wanuri co-founded. It's a concept, or rather a collective, a media collective that she co-founded. In her own words, Afro bubblegum is fun, frivolous, and pure African art, free of political agenda. Let's open with that. Can you please explain what it is and where it is at the moment?
First, I'd like to thank first the audience. Thank you for being here with me, and International Caribbean and Film Festival for inviting me, and for the Spirit Award. I'm so honored to be here because of that. So we created this term Afro bubblegum to art for art's sake, because so often coming out of the African continent, the art that was being made was being dictated by NGOs or was being dictated by social policy. And really, Afro bubblegum started as a result of being asked questions like, with so many horrible things happening in Africa, why would you make a film? This is right after I had made Pomsy. And that question made me stop, because I thought, does imagination have borders? Can I imagine? Do I have the right to imagine just for the sake of imagining? Must I deal with all the problems in Africa as an artist? And the truth is, regardless of what kind of art we make as melanated people, it will be deemed political, because we're talking about a gender, a place, sometimes even a social class, and within that has become political. But all I'm doing is making art that I respond to first and foremost, because I think that I'm not super special. And if anything that I do with my full heart, I believe that there will be at least other people, millions of other people that cry about the same thing, that laugh about the same thing. So if the true intention of art is to communicate, the first audience is yourself. And if you think of yourself as a pure audience, as you're writing and as you're creating, then everything that you create will have people who resonate to it. And I started to look for other examples of Afro bubblegum art in history. Art that has been created not because of marriage, not because of circumcision, not because of any type of ceremony, but because Africans were demonstrating their imagination. And I found lots of glorious examples of fun, fierce, and fantastical examples coming out of Africa, where people have created to express their joy, their creativity, and their hope. And so we started Afro bubblegum almost as a genre to describe the kind of art that is not poverty porn, that is not stricken by disease. In fact, we came up with a question that helps identify whether or not the work is Afro bubblegum. And to pass the Afro bubblegum test, the questions were, are two or more melanated people sick or dying, in need of saving, hopeless, desperate, or lost? And if the answer is yes to any of two or more of those questions, then the work is not Afro bubblegum. because we have the ability to find our own light. We don't need saving, we're past that. We never needed saving, actually, despite what colonialists thought. So it was really an intention to try and make sure that our joy is grounded in ourselves and not in reaction to what else is happening in the world. So that was the idea of Afro Bubblegum.
So that's so true, because when you watch Rafiki, you see a side of Africa that you rarely see on the screen. It's very colorful, it's youthful, there is love and hope. Another question I want to ask is, although Rafiki and Pumzi are very different in genre and setting, there is a very common element in it. In both of the films, there is the individual against the community. Can you talk about it?
I never want to say, because coming from the place that I come from, you can never be against a community. You're always part of a community. So the actions, all of your actions, even though they may be individual, hopefully they work towards a greater good or a global collective conscience, right? So I think that the stylistic theme that runs through all of my work is one of belonging and identity. Because every main character in my films is always searching for a sense of who they are or where they belong. And even in The Sacrifice in Pumzi, where a young woman she escapes a world in order to plant a seed, that is still for the greatness of the world. And she herself was mothering Mother Nature. And that's one of the things that I often feel like we forget to do. We often take from nature, but we forget to be reciprocal, and to be very conscious of mothering, of our caring and compassion for Mother Nature. And that's the question I was trying to solve with Pumzi. But with Rafiki, I really just wanted to try and explain the experience of falling in love. It didn't matter as much that it was two girls falling in love, as much as I wanted an audience to kind of feel the idea of falling in love and forget who was falling in love. And hopefully in that way break barriers of who can fall in love, who can be together, who cannot be together, by just sharing the pure emotional experience that so many of us have gone through.
You know, Rafiki was banned in Kenya. Yeah, so we can talk about it, but before that, I would want you to talk about Pumzi. It's a science fiction film, and it also deals with this concept of Afrofuturism. Can you talk about that?
Well, I prefer to define it as African futurism now, because Afrofuturism has been so linked to African Americans and their beautiful, glorious work that has come out of there. But African futurism is really based on the continent of Africa, the myths, the ideologies, and pulling those myths and ideologists also into the future. And so, what was the question?
About African futurism and science fiction, your influences, etc.
So, strangely enough, when I started making Pumzi, I didn't know it was science fiction. I was just making a story about natural resources, because it started with a lot of things start with conversations that really upset me. So I had a conversation with somebody, and we were having an argument about whether or not water should be free. I thought water should be free. And there was conversation around that. And I said, any God-given natural resource should be free, just like air, it should be free, right? So that's how the conversation started. And as an exploration of that conversation, I started to make a story about Pumzi, about everything, where all natural resources were a commodity. And that arose from that. So when I was making it, I didn't realize it was science fiction. At some point in the process, my producer asked me to define the genre of the work that I was making. And I knew I didn't want to make fantasy for this particular film. I was very clear that I wanted it to be near future or something that all of us will be grappling with and our children will be grappling with in the years to come, which is water. Water is going to be such a huge problem for all of the world, except for people who have shares in Nestle and Coca-Cola because they've bought all the water resources in the world. But for everybody else, it's going to be a huge problem. So I thought that it was really annoying for me. And often I start films with things that annoy me and then try and figure out a solution through the film.
So tell us the challenges involved when you narrate authentic stories from Africa, be it censorship, which you have already faced, or being a woman filmmaker, or the distribution network that you have to navigate, finding producers, of course.
Well, I mean, the question to being a woman filmmaker, I often say that I've never been a man, so I don't have anything to compare it with. But I'm so glad I am a woman. Thank God. I mean, men, Thank you for your presence, thanks. But I am so glad for being a woman because there's a different ideal and compassion that we're bringing to cinema at this time that is so exciting and invigorating. And there's filmmakers that are coming out now who I am so inspired by, like the film that is competing for best foreign film from Morocco, Mother of All Lies, is an extraordinary film. The film that's coming out of Tunisia, Four Daughters, is another very extraordinary film. And even from Senegal, Banel et Adama, these films are really changing the landscape of African cinema by adding such strong female voices to it. So I think the space and the time for debating gender is gone. I think the conversations should now be, how do we see the world? I am so glad that there's a female focus and a female gaze as part of the festival now in this edition, because it allows us to really kind of start thinking about what does that mean, and what is the biases that we've had before about the different types of visions of the world, right? But being an independent filmmaker is incredibly hard, especially from a small filmmaking community like Kenya. At the moment in Kenya, we only release maybe 1 or 2 films a year theatrically, which is ridiculous. It's such a small filmmaking community. So coming from there, it's a challenge to find even funding to make your films. Rafiki took 7 years to find funding for. And that was deeply depressing, and I don't suggest anybody spend 7 films unless you're deeply passionate about your film. But it takes a long time to try and find funding for films coming out of the African continent. And this is something that we as African filmmakers are really trying to change and make sure that our voices are being added to the global cinema as much as any other voices.
And also about taking your film to the audience. Tell us about the distribution network in Africa and outside, of course.
Well, we have different types of distribution models in Africa because Africa is so vast. But in Nigeria, Nollywood films seem to reach every single part of the continent and beyond, which is a glorious thing. But for smaller regions that don't have an established filmmaking space, we have to rely on foreign filmmakers. So I am glad to see the rise of African films being sold, even though they're not being sold for the right amount of money, on VOD platforms, on streaming services. That has really began to change the way we have access to our own films. Because so often films would be made, they would go through festivals, and they would never be seen in their audiences at home. And so these streaming services have really allowed us to be able to see our own work and appreciate our work against a larger global perspective and see where we are within that, what conversations we're having within that global perspective. And that's been really important.
Now that you have talked about the VOD platforms, On Twitter, on TikTok or Instagram Reels, there are a lot of Africans taking the narrative in their own hands and talking about their authentic everyday experiences. So how has the social media changed the filmmaking landscape?
I think social media has just changed the world more than anything else. And just like this part of the world, we have had such a huge storytelling community coming out of Africa. We were very big on oral stories and oral histories. We had seers who would predict the future and tell us what was going to come. We had historians who not only could tell you the lineage of your own personal history and how it tied into your community, but could also say, were the collective memory of communities. And that was a glorious thing that we seem to have lost. So the fact that the storytellers are coming back now in different mediums, using film, using social media, is really just us expressing ourselves in ways that we've always expressed ourselves, just using new platforms and being able for those platforms to link us with the rest of the world. And that's a glorious thing. But also, I think we also have to just be generally careful of social media and the traps that we can fall into. But in all, I think it is exciting that we're able to connect so many different audiences on social media in a way that we couldn't before. And because so many of the storytellers coming out of the world were female storytellers, because you told stories when you were cooking or when you're trying to entertain the children, those storytellers, those female storytellers have now in Kenya become women. So a lot of the filmmakers in Kenya are female filmmakers.
You're one of the most powerful voices emerging from African cinema at the moment. So what is your relationship with the old African cinema? What are your earliest or early influences, etc.?
Well, Sembène Ousmane is one of my favorite filmmakers for sure, but I've also been influenced by films like Tukibuki, which really just started to show us a different way of seeing the world. Right now, one of the most exciting voices coming out of the continent is films from Sudan, which is an extraordinary space that we, even as Africans, never had access to. So the fact that this festival opened with Goodbye Julia, and the same producer of Goodbye Julia created one of my favorite Sudanese films called You Will Die at 20. It's the space now to start reckoning with new voices, but also new storytelling types, because we don't always have the same classical film structure or story structure as the West does. And it's time to kind of embrace the fact that we are breaking the mold, or we've always been telling stories in a different way. And that's really, I'm very excited about African cinema.
So when you look for influences and inspirations, from everyday life or from your own history, where do you look at?
Oh, first from my grandmother. My grandmother was a great storyteller, and so was my mother. My mother is wildly imaginative.
She was a doctor?
She's a doctor. She's a pediatrician. So she would tell incredible stories when we were growing up, just to get us to eat or to get us to behave properly. And I really think it's because of her influence in my life that I was able to really pursue a creative industry. Even though they still ask when I'm going to get a real job. But I think one day they'll really appreciate that maybe this is a real job.
So also tell us about the film festivals and how it influences or it helps the filmmaking ecosystem in the continent.
I think filmmakers have been so integral, not only in the discovery of talent, but in the promotion of a filmmaker's life and career. Without film festivals, I wouldn't have been able to find a manager, an agent, and actually start working and making money, because it took me 11 years. It took me 11 years working in the industry before I got a single paycheck that actually made sense. Before then, paychecks came from either making NGO documentaries or making commercials, but never from the craft of film and TV. So now, having gone to film festivals and my work being recognized in film festivals, I'm able to now hire services as a writer or as a director of other people's work in a way that I was completely unable to before. And that wouldn't have been possible without my films being discovered at film festivals. So I'm deeply indebted to film festivals for the support of my work.
Is there a filmmaking community, a tight-knit or close-knit community in Kenya, or are you just a bunch of people scattered every?
We're too small a community to be scattered. So the filmmaking community in Kenya is quite strong and very supportive. In fact, there's a producer called Judy Kibinge who has taken it upon herself to really be a strong executive producer and producer of a lot of the documentaries and some of the most fascinating documentaries that are coming out of the continent and coming through Kenya. And I'm so proud of the work that she does. But as a result, we're creating an ecosystem of filmmakers that can rely on each other, that can talk to each other, that we ask advice from each other from, that we collaborate with. But when you look at filmmaking societies that have succeeded in other places in the world, it's because they've had teams of people who are working together. They've had teams of people who are supporting each other. I mean, the best example, obviously, is the Mexican filmmakers, you know, who have always been supportive of each other and have grown as a community. And because of that strength in numbers, they've been able to make more of an impact on international cinema than anything else. I really would love to be able to do the same thing in Africa, where we collaborate with one another, where we help each other grow, where we criticize kindly other people's work, and we make sure that we're bolstering up the success of others, not only your own. And that's why I keep calling out young filmmakers who are coming out, emerging filmmakers that are coming out, especially this year of films. Please do go and support them, do go and watch them, because that's the only way we all survive as a group.
And are also international co-productions happening in Africa? And how is the situation?
There's international co-productions happening in Africa, not so much in Kenya at the moment, and that's something that we're looking to change. But there are international co-productions happening, especially out of South Africa. South Africa has a lot of co-productions with many different countries. But sometimes the problem with co-productions is you can lose your cut. You can lose your creative control, because other people who think that they know more about Africa, even though they don't live on the continent, will want to define your film for you. And so I remember with Rafiki, there was one of the co-producers we were working with in the edit said that the film wasn't African enough. But I was the African making it, and they were sitting in Europe. So that was a bit complicated, because their understanding of Africa was drums and wildlife. And my film was about two people falling in love. So the context was a little off. So you have to be careful when you're working with co-productions, because they're going to try and take creative control of your work and try and maintain creative control whenever you can.
Now that you've mentioned Rafiki again, I'm curious to know about the colors that you've used in the film. There is an explosion of colors on the screen. Tell us about that.
Actually, the colors that I was using in Rafiki were really to mimic, because it was about young love blooming, I was mimicking the colors of a rose. So they were light and fresh at the beginning of the film. And as the film moved and changed, you saw the colors became darker and were wilting and became more muddied in a way that in the same way that you would see the decay of a rose. So I was really looking to make sure, first, that we saw the world in rose-colored glasses, but also to make sure that there was an emotional storyline with the use of color. So color wasn't just there for color's sake. It was there as part of the conversation of what the characters were going through. Hi.
Now,
Karibu, welcome.
Thank you very much. The fun swallows and fears. Let's explain that to us.
This is my biggest fan in India.
I'm 80 years old and 56 is in the film business. I've been coming from Calcutta to Kerala for the last 24 years, and this is a see my friend filmmaker.
so let's talk about the censorship and the ban that you faced. How did you navigate that period? And you still do.
The ban was curious because it happened in a series of different ways, right? So when you apply for a film, when you apply to make a film, you have to get a film license to make the film. When you get a film license, the film license comes with police who sit on set and who are in charge with making sure that you are following the norms and values of the country that are not defined anywhere. So a policeman is able, and I'm not talking about highly paid policemen, you know what I mean? But the policeman is able to stop your film based on how they feel about what the norms and values of the country are. So for Rafiki, what we did is that we made sure that there was one person who was dedicated to giving them chai the whole day. They just ate and drank tea and were given the greatest meals, so they never came on set because they were so well fed. That's the first thing we did with censorship. Then, before we applied for the rating, and we only wanted a rating, before we applied for the rating, when I was in the middle of the edit, Kenya banned 5 cartoons. Cartoons. Like Adventure Time, Hey Arnold, all those were banned in Kenya while I was still in the edit. So I was like, if cartoons are being banned, I'm going to have a problem. Anyway, we continued on. The next thing that happened, such a story. The next thing that happened is the head of the Kenya Film Classification Board was sent a picture of 2 male lions mounting. And so he banned the lions. He said that they were immoral, they should be separated, and they should go for counseling, and they learned that behavior from gay tourists. And they saw the gay tourists and mimicked that behavior. So at that point, I knew things were bad. And then I went for a meeting with the head of the classification board. And he said to me that if I changed the ending of my film and made it more remorseful, then he would give me a rating. But if I didn't change my film would be banned. And while that banning might make me very popular, he actually said that. He said, this ban will make you very popular, but popular around the wrong people. You don't want to be popular around those people who are banned, right? So when we refused to change the ending of the film was banned. And it remains banned. But we managed to lift the ban for 7 days, and in those 7 days, all the cinemas were full from morning until evening. Thank you to the Kenyan government for all the marketing that you did, because there's nothing better than a ban to market your film, let me tell you. And so, as a result of that, the theaters were full for 7 days, and then the ban was reinstated, and now we're in court suing the Kenya Film Classification Board for our right to freedom of expression. And so we continue to be in court fighting that case.
Yeah, sounds very familiar for us Indians.
I heard there's quite a few filmmakers who keep suing the government here. It's such a great history. I love it.
So I think we'll open the floor for questions.
Let's give you a microphone.
On being a homophobic myself as a critic. In fact, I'm a little bit orthodox, you can say, but I'm a postmodern person. So Rafiki, the friend, was banned for 7 days.
Was unbanned for 7 days.
And then Rafiki, the friend, that was banned for 7 days?
No, it's banned. The
Banned.
ban was lifted for 7 days.
For 7, that I'm talking about.
Yeah.
That I'm talking about. But the difference between you made some documentary filmmaker, as you made some documentary film, isn't it?
There is a film called I Am Samuel that was also banned, but I didn't make it.
You didn't make it.
No.
I'm talking about your films, and so but then you see, you look twice.
Yes.
And before that, from a whisper, I saw it, the film in my Google. You see, can you say them come out on this from a whisper?
So From a Whisper was made about a bomb blast that happened in, oh God, when did a bomb blast happen? There was bombings that happened on American embassies in Kenya. And my story was about the bombings that happened. But really what I was concentrating on is the idea of forgiveness.
Yeah.
Because even when somebody commits an atrocity, how do we forgive that atrocity? How do we live with trying to forgive a person over and over and over? So that's the kind of compassion that I was looking at in From a Whisper. And because our country's motto is peace, love, and unity, I found that there is space for love and compassion, even for queer couples and for same-sex relationships within Kenya, based on its motto, and based on a global, universal motto of humanity and compassion. I am against any phobias. I believe that there should be space for understanding, compassion, and conversation, and respect, because even if we don't agree, it doesn't mean we need to cancel.
Yeah, Kenyan cinema, just a second. Kenyan cinema is said to be a reflection of what should I say, that the post-war colonialism, poverty, AIDS, etc. Is that non-employment is an issue in Kenya? Because for the first time in India, after 75 years, the Kenyan cinema has entered into Kerala, and first Kenyan director has come, according to my history and cataloging my history. You are the first in Kenya, the first to come to IFFK. This is a benchmark event.
I think that I am excited about the relations between Kenya and India. I'm excited about the continuous growth between our two countries, because we have had a long history. There are so many peoples of Indian descent who are Kenyan now, who live in Kenya. There's so many. There is a great lineage of the great relations between Kenya and India. So I truly hope one day in my life I get to shoot a Kenyan Bollywood film with music and dancing. That would be the best thing that'd be the best thing I could do in my life. Because there has been such a great love of Indian cinema in Kenya. There has been such a great appreciation. In fact, it was during the 80s and the 90s, during the dictatorship of Moi, that was the only cinema we were allowed to watch, was Indian cinema, because it was so chaste in theory. And because it had the same family values that we have. So we have grown up on Indian cinema, and we have such a great love for it. And I'm truly excited to continue to explore that relationship between Kenya and India.
Hello.
We have a question there.
Hi. Good afternoon. What about the African literature? It has not become not become famous except Usman Sambene, who was also a novelist and also made films. And also there are a lot of white directors who made films on blacks. No? For example, Color Purple. Color Purple. Oh, is it? Spielberg, I think, yeah. And Spike Lee. Yeah, I think he's also an African filmmaker. Yeah. And what I want to suggest is, why don't you have an African film festival like you have? We have festivals like Cannes, whatever, Belarusian, Indian festivals like that. You should have a festival. You should get all the black directors and start a festival in a small way. Yeah. And so definitely you will be on the globe one day. You have made very good films, and as I think I spoke to you yesterday, you're on this set, you're on the stage. I think there are so many wonderful artists. Like we had Sidney Poitier, Richard Roundtree, Harry Belafonte, Whoopi Goldberg, and so many actors like that. So you should have a film festival.
In fact, there is a film festival called FESPACO, which is one of the oldest film festivals in Africa that really exemplifies African cinema in Burkina Faso. It is you must go. It's a wonderful festival. And I want you to know, none of the filmmakers that go to that film festival are lazy. They're really energetic, not like Christopher Nolan. They're very energetic, very enthusiastic, and very well loved.
I mean, also, like, there is a film called Cabin in the Sky.
Yeah, I must watch
it's a musical. You also should make musicals like that.
I agree. It's the one thing I want to do more than anything in the world is make energetic, non-lazy musicals. They would be my favorite thing in the world to do.
You are one of the greatest dancers in the world. All the Mexican dance was stolen by your original tribal dance. All dances of Mexico, flamenco, and all stolen by tribal dance of Africa.
That's why you should come, sir. We should invite you to Kenya so that you can give us courage to keep pursuing our own indigenous cultures, because I completely agree with you. We have so much to share with the world, and we haven't had a chance to.
On a different note, there is Pan-African Film Archive. I think it has an online presence. It consolidates the film history from different African countries.
No, online. No, you should have festivals.
They are. There's one in.
Many people come. 2,000-3,000 people come.
They are.
They watch.
There's the Zanzibar Film Festival. There's FESPACO in Burkina Faso. There's the Durban Film Festival. There's AFRIF in Nigeria. There are a growing number of African film. Oh, there's even Carthage in Tunisia that really concentrate on African cinema as well. So I would love to invite you to come to some of them so that you can also discover new African voices.
There is a film, there's a lovely film about female circumcision.
Yes, by Semben Usman. Yes, he did a really great job. And there's a new film coming out next year called Sarah that pursues the same thing by director.
Sarah has already come.
No, not yet. It hasn't been released. Yeah, another Sarah's come. This one hasn't been released yet.
Yeah. Hi.
Hello, my dear. Now, here, most people have questions regarding your film. But I'm not a film person, my father is. I'm a woman from the literary background, so I want to know something from the literary background. Yes. Because, you see, that's been my filter through which I have seen the struggle of African women. Yes. So it starts with Butia Macheta, people like Chimamanda and Ngozi. Yes. And my experience from them, and Toni Morrison, the great ones, that the fact, the women there, they always have to, they are always fighting, whether in India, whether in Africa or in USA, or in some foreign countries, or not even in foreign countries, perhaps in their own countries, there is a continuous struggle between the inner scape and the outer scape. And there is a kind of fascination for the blue eyes. And that makes them, this because of the continuous domination of the male white domination, which has imbibed in them that it is important to be white. It is important to have blue eyes to be beautiful and to survive well. So these things, comes across very much, crossways in literature. And these have also troubled the writers as well. So what do you have to say to that? And I want you to address this issue also in your films, my dear.
Thank you.
Yes.
So actually, Rafiki is based on literature. Rafiki is the adaptation of a short book called Jambulatri by Monica Arakade-Nyeko. And one of the films that I'm working on at the moment is also a translation is an adaptation of a book by Rosa Guy that hasn't come out yet. I'm still working on it. But I appreciate what you say about literature. Literature has been such a force coming out of Africa. One of my idols is obviously Goge Wadiongo. And Goge, I often not only refer to his work in the work that I'm creating now, but I also had an opportunity to speak to him when I'm doing my projects and ask his advice. So the literary voice has been very, very important. But you have to remember, especially out of Kenya, a lot of the writers that came out of Kenya had to go into exile because of the dictatorship. A lot of writers had their work banned by the same laws that have continued to ban Rafiki. And because of that, there's a lot of parents and people who are now saying, oh, don't be a writer. Writers are anti-government. So there's a self-censorship that's happening as a result of what happened to people in the past. And there is no space for self-censorship, not only in this country or in other countries, because we need to be able to express ourselves and our ideas, whether in literature or in art. But I agree with you, literature has been the backbone of African storytelling. And my hope is to continue to do adaptations of African literature as much as is possible, because it's my guiding light.
You can also make world literature, Russian literature, French literature. You can make
Indeed.
films out of it. You don't have to be African literature.
100%. And I promise you, sir, one of the projects I'm working on is also an adaptation of a British writer.
Yeah, hi. My question is a two-parter. Yes. First thing is, I'll keep it very simple. When can we expect the first, you had Black Panther, which is essentially about Africa, fictionalized Africa. It was like one of the biggest films. It was supported by the community itself, in a way. Yeah. It was not just a story, it was supported by the community. So there is a big market for not just African films, films that have a really good storytelling and a big canvas. First question. Second thing is, I had to congratulate you on both Rafiki and Pumzi. Because I was not able to book a ticket. If I'm not able to book a ticket through the IFFK app, it's definitely a big film and people are going to watch it. And particularly, I have a sci-fi bent and I was not able to book it, first thing. 2, Rafiki being banned and it is taking you across the world. Yeah. So congratulations on that. So my second question is, Kenya has one of the fastest startup ecosystems in the world. Yes. You have big companies coming out of Africa, and I think Kenya had one of the, bigger than UPI. You can usually send money just with an SMS. Even before UPI was a big thing in India. So I understand that you have some restrictions through the government, but when can we see stories from Kenya? Particularly the startup ecosystem or the business, because Africa is no more, as you say, it's not about, Kenya especially is not about Masai Mara or the tribes or the sanctuaries. So yeah, so these are my questions, and I wish to ask more questions, but there are more people wish to ask me questions. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. I absolutely agree with you. I think the thing about the hurt that has happened in Africa is not recognizing artists as entrepreneurs, is not recognizing that art creates wealth, not only for the artists, but also for the country. When I had the opportunity to visit New Zealand, and I realized that 3 billion, and they're a small country, 3 billion of their revenue was generated from film and TV. That's huge. And those are the kind of models that I would really like Kenya to see, and see that not only does it promote industry within the country, but also it leads to tourism, it leads to other effects that we could never imagine. So I thank you for the challenge of the startup. I am going to pursue that, because I think that is a very keen way of thinking about it. And Kenyan startups are very strong because we have a very entrepreneurial spirit in Kenya. And that's something that we can move into spaces of art and make sure that the art is going in the same direction as other industries. In short, you please make sure that we see some of your work, so that we can also encourage you and make sure that your work is getting out.
What about Cuban films?
I love Cuban films.
But mostly made by black people, right?
You know, there's black people in so many different places, but also more so than black people. I think what we should be looking at, and what a lot of the problems have been between melanated people and non-melanated people. So sometimes, as people of color, we really have to find ways to collaborate more with each other and co-productions with each other as well, so that the West is not controlling our stories and our financing.
Hi, I just wanted to talk about your film Rafiki. I've seen Pumzi and Rafiki, that's all I've seen. Apologies if this has already been asked, but I would really like to talk about the editing of Rafiki. Because it was so unique, it was so unapologetic, and I saw it again like 5 days ago once I knew that you were coming to the festival, and I was reminded of how pleasant it was. It was just, so yourself somehow. I just wanted to hear you talk about film editing. That's all. Thank you.
Sure. I think for Rafiki, this film editing was very particular, because again, what I wanted to do was really have the audience experience the idea of falling in love. So there's that scene where you can hear some of them talking, but you can't see them. That scene was more. I think it's Khalil Gibran who says something about, you remember the taste of wine long after the vessel has been broken. And it was something like that I was trying to try and create. Sometimes you can be with a person and you can remember how much you laughed and how much you enjoyed yourself, but you can't remember what was said. But you remember the feeling of being wonderfully, that's exactly what I was trying to recreate. And that's why the editing kind of followed that pattern. Because I wanted to make sure that the emotion of the space and the joy that the women were feeling among themselves was greater than what the words they were saying. So the editing style was trying to reflect that as much as possible, is to create a feeling of falling in love. And that was the context. So usually when I'm going through editing, I think of the theme I'm trying to communicate as well as the story. And I try and find new editorial ways of communicating the theme. And even in choosing the shots, I try and think of what the theme is when I'm choosing the shots, so that I can communicate the theme through the shot choices and the editing. But thank you so much for that question.
Hi, Wanuri. Can you recall the 11 years that you struggled?
Oh, yes.
And
I ate rice and beans only. I can recall it very well.
And the struggles you went through for the 11 years before your debut.
So truly, what I would do is I would work to make films, right? So I would work, make enough money to pay rent, and then use that time to write. And then when I ran out of money, I would look for another job. And that's really how I lived for 11 years. I was looking for ways to find money to work on my films. And so a lot of the films that I made, Rafiki and before Rafiki, a lot of them were self-financed or partially self-financed, because that was the only way that we could make films, as well as finding grants. And there's some grants that we applied to and they kept rejecting us, but we would apply 3, 4, 5 times to the same grant until they got tired of us and gave us money. So persistence, stubbornness, and hunger, like genuine hunger. My parents really got tired of feeding me, but I'm so glad that they did, because I was able to now make the films and save money to make films. But it is a sacrifice, and there's nothing more demoralizing for a long time, working in your passion and working in something that you truly believe in, but you're not paid for it. It's something, it almost makes you feel like you're doing nothing, that you're standing still. And I think that's a challenge for many artists, but my only thing to say is perseverance is necessary for art to come through.
Hi.
Just a second. This is about Africa I'm asking. This most probably you have not seen.
Later ask, sir.
Just a second. You will find the same kind of grey, grimy, restricted reality as we find in Senegalese film, Malian film, and as you say, this of Gaug and Burkina Faso. Yes. Same kind of realities they are fighting like anything. I met this one twice as a jury member in Delhi. Okay, Burkina Faso and the Seife came, and also this Delhi. So we met together, and it was 15-day festival. Yeah. It was 15th of the 1980s, and it was in the June. Oh, that's such a blessing. See, he's dying right now. Yes. He has a different language. It's the same kind of difficulties, economic and political inhibitions as they face. Yes. Still now. Still the same. Suleiman Sisi of Mali is still alive, but cannot make a film. No. What's your answer?
My answer is that we should support those filmmakers. My answer is that we should make sure that we're going out to buy the films that are available to be bought, even though some of those proceeds may not go back to them, but because they need to be supported. And that's why I am so glad for festivals like Kerala, because festivals like Kerala not only pay attention to emerging voices, they go into the past and they look for older filmmakers that have made work in the past, and they support them. And that is the glory of film festivals like this. And that's why I am more excited than anything to be here in this state with such an active and loving cinema audience.
Hi, I just wanted to make a comment. It's when you were talking about, first of all, I'm so excited to be here and so excited to hear all the things you said. Very lovely to see sisters from Africa. And what I wanted, when you were talking about the bubble gum, like when you talk about art for art, when the most discourse about art for art I've heard is from America, where like artists like Andy Warhol would end up making their art commercial. They're making, like installations like supermarkets, like that. So I call myself an intersectional feminist, and I was a little apprehensive about what you mean by art for art's sake. But when I heard that you were talking about joy, you were talking about pleasure, you were talking about exploration and energy and all these things. For me, these things are profoundly political, coming from especially globally oppressed community. These things are especially like Audre Lorde and other feminist mothers have talked about pleasure and how the oppressed communities' expressions of pleasure are important and needed, because we are always taught in the language of poetry porn, as you were saying, or all sorts of, like frustrated people or that kind of portrayal, gossiping people. And yeah, I found all the things you said because you were talking about the responsibility to the Mother Earth. All these things I found profoundly political, and thank you for that.
Thank you. Because joy is an act of resistance. And that's the truth, because so often we are put in where there has been a view of making sure that we know our place by making sure that the only images of us come out as images of suffering, images of poverty, images of pain. We're much more than our pain, than our struggle. We are resilient, we are joyful, we are revolutionary in our joy, and that's something to celebrate, because otherwise we're playing into the same narrative that they want us to fall into, which is pain and struggle only. That is not what we are. And also, if we don't create images of hope and joy, then what are we working toward? How can we tell others that we are hopeful, joyful, if there's no images of us that are hopeful and joyful? That doesn't make sense. If seeing is believing, then we must make sure that we see brilliant visual images of ourselves, so that we learn for ourselves that we are worthy of joy, we are worthy of hope, and we are worthy of so much more than what they tell us that we can be.
Art for art's sake, it's very debatable. All art should be sold, except the rituals in the families, in the countries. Otherwise, there is no art for art's sake. Everything is sold in a small way, in a big way.
But art being sold doesn't make it not art.
No, when you do a theater, you sell your tickets.
Yes.
When you do a painting, you sell it to somebody.
That doesn't make it any less art, because an artist must eat. Otherwise, how do they support themselves?
Finally, you have to sell it like that.
Yeah.
There's no art for art's sake. I can't keep on acting for myself.
Sorry, I have to cut you off. We have a question here.
Hi, ma'am. Excuse me, ma'am. Excuse me, sir. Hi, ma'am. I just want to ask a question as a continuation of some questions asked earlier. So one question is that a few years ago, one of the most popular debates in Kerala in Malayalam cinema was the one you said earlier, is art for art's sake, or does art have something to contribute to the society or the individuals? It was a big debate and there were many opinions. So we would like to know your opinion. And another question is, why the word bubblegum? I am very interested in knowing that. Why the name bubblegum in your project?
So I used Afro bubblegum because bubblegum is one of the most meaningless things in the world. It exists just to give pleasure and to leave a good taste in your mouth. That's all I would love to do, is create films that give pleasure and leave a good taste in your senses. But art for art's sake, does it change the society? Hell yeah, it changes the society. I don't mean to be rude. Yes, it changes the society, because if it didn't change the society, why was it banned? Why do we ban work if it doesn't change societies? There must be something that people are scared of, something that people are worried about if things are being banned, if art is being banned. So yes, the power of art is because it is the voice of the people. It is the voice of many, many, sometimes even the voice of the voiceless. And using art to be able to explain what is happening in society, using art to transport emotionally audiences to a different place, makes us more sympathetic, makes us more open to ideas, makes us more collaborative. I promise you there's less people who would have accepted me here if I hadn't been a filmmaker, if I hadn't been part of a community of artists that continue to spread the word that we are all one, that we all belong together in one nation, that we all love, we all seek security, we all seek comfort, we all want joy. The only way to communicate that in a global way is through art, music, dance. And that's why art is important. It changes society. More than it changes society, it is the fabric of the soul. My husband is a doctor. Every morning he wakes up and he says, "I'm off to save the world." That's what he says. I love him. He's arrogant. I love him. And I say, I give the world a reason to save. That's what the point of art is. I give people a reason to live. That's what artists do. So while he saves the world, I give people a reason to be saved. And that's the point of artists. And I encourage more artists to be that, so that we can continue in our own way to save the world through finding connectivity and through finding a shared humanity that sometimes lacks in politics. Oh, I had a thing about the politic thing. I've been debating with this idea of why are our bodies, because we're born into bodies and we're born into races, why are they considered political? If you're white and hetero, your love is not seen as political. But the moment you start changing that dynamic, the moment you have mixed race couples, it becomes political. The moment that it becomes same-sex couples, it becomes political. To the point that it feels like two women are not in love, they're in political. Oh, those two women are just demonstrating their politics. They're not really demonstrating their emotion. So I think we should also start challenging the idea that because of our bodies, our work is political. It should not be, it should be life. It should be an exploration of our ability to live and our ability to create. And that should be, the politics should be human suffering and getting rid of human suffering, not our expressions of our soul. I just wanted to add that to what you said.
What about animation films?
I love animation. I'm making an animation at the moment. There's other animation films that are coming. If you check on Disney Plus, there's a series of animation films that just came out of Africa that are great.
Hello, ma'am. Hello. Ma'am, I'm a film student. My question is not about your films or like art. I just want a guidance from you. Right? Being a film student, you are very passionate about your work. You want to learn new things. You want to watch more and more films. But sometimes it's like you start losing your passion. You don't know what to do. You think that you will write something, but you try and you fail. You don't like to watch films like you like to do before. So have you been through this, and what do you do to overcome like this?
Right now, I'm going through that very same thing. I should be writing a script right now I should be writing a script as well, but it's very hard. And like I was saying to the person who has been so generous leading me around the festival, is I have a problem watching my own films. After it's edited, I don't watch them. I actually have a very hard time watching my films. So even in the screenings, I don't go for screenings. I only go in at the end after everybody, because I recognize every mistake I made. I know everything I could have done better. I recognize everything that I will be doing better in the next. So it becomes very hard for me as a filmmaker to watch my own work. But what I did that changed my approach to filmmaking is I made it a job. There's this idea that, artists, we only work when the inspiration hits us. That's a lie. Start in the morning, sit at your desk, make it a 9-to-5 job. Start at 9, end at 5, like any other person. And you'll find, even when it's hard to write, you'll continue to write. And because writing is rewriting, if you do it once, the first draft will always be horrible. Just like the first edit, it will always be horrible. And you'll go through that thing of suffering because you think that you're the worst filmmaker in the world, and why did you even do it? And what's the point? And your parents could be more proud of you if you were a doctor or a lawyer. All that stuff. But the truth is our voices are important, and it's that pain and that frustration of getting through it, of moving past your ego, because that's your ego that you're struggling with, that allows you to really create. Once you push your ego out of the way, then that's when the truth comes out. That's when you're able to create. So I beg you, please, sit at your desk and keep writing. And make sure that even if it's not about your film, that you're always writing a couple of pages a day, because it will help you to continue to write and help you to see that working in art is work. It's not just fantastical imagination. It is work that needs to be put in so that your art can be realized. So good luck. I look forward to seeing your work. It depends. If you're going to call me lazy, I'm not so happy about it.
I think we are well past the time allowed for us. So I think I'll wrap it up now. There is... Do you have a question?
Please. Please do. You can be my second husband.
So I think we'll conclude by, I want to quote you. You said something so beautiful during your last conversation, last talk. Joy is an act of resistance. So beautiful. I think I'll remember that for a long time. So thank you so much, Wanuri. And thank you all for coming. And thank you all for the questions.
Thank you. It's such a pleasure to be here. Thank you. Have a great day.